For me, Act 5, Scene 5 is the last really important scene in Macbeth in terms of the characterisation of the main character. And many great essays at National 5 and higher level kind of end in this scene because the events that take place after this scene are kind of inevitable from this point on. And some really important quotes in this scene for you to understand and learn and be able to apply in this as you kind of move your critical essay towards a conclusion. And I guess what we see in this scene is how far Macbeth has come and how changed he has been by what he has done throughout this play. There's a moment where he hears a shriek, and we later discover that is in fact the sound of Lady Macbeth dying. We think, although it's never fully confirmed, we think she has killed herself due to kind of the dreadful state that she has got herself in with the guilt of what she has done. And Macbeth hears this sound, not yet knowing what has caused it, and says, and I've highlighted it here, I have almost forgot the taste of fears. And then he says, and I've not highlighted this, the time has been my senses would have cooled to hear the night shriek. And of course, when we hear him say that, we think of Act 2, Scene 2, where he's hearing the knocking in the night just after he has killed Duncan and says, how is it with me that every noise appalls me? But by this stage, he says he has almost forgot the taste of fears. A bit later in this, I'll just move myself up there. A little bit later in this speech, he says, I have supped full with horrors. Direness, familiar to my slaughterous thoughts, cannot once start me. And there, Macbeth is explaining for us what has happened to him. That it's almost as though he has seen so much killing. He has witnessed so much horror, and actually the imaginations of still further horrors in his head have driven him to the point where he has become brutalized, where he has almost lost the capacity to feel anymore. Remember at the end of the banquet scene in Act 3, he says, that his kind of the desperate terror that he is in when he sees the ghost of Banquo. He says, these are but the initiate fears that want hard use. We are but young indeed. And he was kind of saying, if we just press on with our course and keep killing, then we will become used to the feelings of guilt and anxieties that are associated with our position. And in a sense, that is true. He has become so used to the horror that his senses have become dulled to any kind of emotion. And he has been brutalized and lost the capacity to feel anything as a result. So really important, because that plays into the weariness that Macbeth has with life at the end of this play. And then, of course, somebody comes on stage and tells Macbeth that actually that shriek was in fact his wife dying. And remember when we first encountered Lady Macbeth, where she was reading that letter that her husband had sent to her, and Macbeth referred to her as my dearest partner of greatness. And later in that scene, he called her my dearest love. And there was this incredible picture of intimacy between them and great love that they had at that moment. But of course, they have dealt with their guilt in two very different ways. Macbeth has become another man. He has taken on this terrifying role, whereas Lady Macbeth has lived in denial to the point where she could live that way no longer, and she dies probably through taking her own life. But when Macbeth hears that his wife has died, he responds in a really bizarre way. He says, she should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. And then he goes into this incredibly eloquent um, speech, perhaps his most eloquent and most famous speech in the whole play. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and is no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It's an incredibly eloquent speech, but strange in this context. You'll remember Macduff's reaction when he was told that his wife and children had been slaughtered, and he was almost unable to speak at all. And when he did, it was in broken language, half-finished sentences full of questions and wonderings, because he was so overwhelmed with his emotions. But Macbeth is strangely unable to connect with the emotion of this moment. He is, as we've said already, being brutalized by the horrors that he has committed. And here, really, the meaning of this speech, which is has been long debated, but I guess in simple terms, what he's saying, he's reflecting on is the kind of meaninglessness of life, and the fact, I suppose, that implies that his own life has become meaningless. Remember, all that he wanted to get from seizing the crown has remained out with his grasp, and life is just a tale told by an idiot. It's full of sound and fury, full of rushing around, full of fears and anxieties and violence. But in the end, it signifies nothing. In the end, there is no meaning to it. And really, this incredibly wearied place that Macbeth gets to, where actually he almost starts to welcome death. And because of that, a really strange thing takes place right at the end of Macbeth's life, which has the effect of heightening the tragedy for him. And he says these lines right at the end of this scene. I begin, as in I begin to be aweary of the sun, and wish the estate of the world were now undone. There's the weariness. There's the sense that life is no longer worth living. That actually this army that's approaching to unseat him and kill him, in a sense, he's almost relishing it, because life and the throne have become such a burden to him now. And because of that weariness, he ends the scene saying this: ring the alarm bell, blow wind, come rack, at least we'll die with harness on our back. And there we can see that because of the weariness, precisely because he feels that in a sense he's dead already, that he has nothing left to lose, a glimmer of the old heroic warrior emerges again right at the end. Remember the previous Thane of Cawdor, who was a traitor, and we heard in Act 1 is nothing became him in life like believing it. That right at the moment of death, the previous Thane of Cawdor had died with a certain degree of heroism, and that was foreshadowing what the next Thane of Cawdor would be like, which is Macbeth. And he, right at the end of his life, precisely because he has nothing left to lose, this warrior re-emerges, and that has the effect of heightening the tragedy, because the audience get a glimpse of what Macbeth might have been, perhaps what he even should have been, had he not made the dreadful decisions that he did. And it's not enough for us, I think, to change our sympathies. Remember, this is a man who has been responsible for the brutal murder of women and children, but it is just enough for us to remember the warrior that he was and the man that he could have been had he not taken the dreadful decision to kill his king.